Welcome to Planetary Calendars, Astro Portraits. I'm Ralph D. Meaches, one of the astrologers. In this segment, we're going to talk about the chart of the actor and director, Ron Howard. Very interesting person, born on March 1st, 1954 at 9:03 a.m. in Duncan, Oklahoma. Now, why would this child who was brought up in Hollywood be born in Oklahoma? Because when he was born, his father had left for his military deployment, and the family moved to Oklahoma where the deployment was, and he was born there, and then they moved back to Hollywood because his father, after all, was an actor. His mother had been an actor. He grew up in the business, and so his earliest childhood experiences have to do with being on camera when he appeared in TV shows. Of course, later on, he went on to become Opie in the Andy Griffith Show and was on there for many years. And then from there, he was in a number of other roles and then eventually moved into directing, which was something he recognized he wanted to do very young. He would always be around the set talking with everyone in the set about, how do you do that? How do you do that? Talk to the cameraman, talk to the soundman. How do you do that? Why are you doing that? Of course, he's such a nice kid. How could they not answer him? And when you look at your chart, you realize he really is a nice kid. He has Aries rising, right, which is rambunctious and energetic. He has Vesta in Aries, which is kind of a nice bright spark. It brings a sparkle to his energy. He has no other planets near the rising, interestingly, though he has in the 12th house his Sun, Mercury, and Venus all in Pisces and the part of fortune. Now, that 12th house Sun is something that you see in a lot of people who work in the movies. And the reason is the 12th house, traditionally was always seen as, the place of restriction of hospitals and prisons. Well, yeah, that's kind of a medieval approach to it. But it was also the place of monasteries and spiritual retreats. It was also the place of the artist's studio. And it was the place in which imagination could reign. Well, where does imagination reign more than in the movies? And it's all about the big picture, especially movies which are done with a large group of people. For the 2 or 3 people you see on the scene, on the screen, between that little square, there's 10 or 12 people behind it, and then more people behind that handling the logistics. So it's a big organizational thing. And so many of these people who work in the movies have that 12th house Sun. Interesting, as you go through the houses, because you see the way people appear to us, it's done in a sequence. People see our first house first, so they see his Aries rising, which is supported by his Mars in Sagittarius in the 12th house. So it's a real bright energy, and of course, being all fire signs, it's no surprise he has red hair. Then first planet you actually see is the Jupiter in the 3rd house. Well, it's Jupiter in Gemini. So Jupiter has lots and lots of energy, optimistic, in Gemini, the sign of the kid. And so everyone's experience of him is their memory of him as a child on TV as Opie, right? And this is something that's always with him. But it also gives him, in the 3rd house, his ability to communicate a very expansive, very optimistic, very generous way of working. And if you see him working with actors, he really is the most generous and helpful. And, Jupiter loves to give advice. And it's very good at it because it does it in a very optimistic way. And he's so good at that. Interestingly, in this 4th house, he has the planet of Uranus and the South Node. Well, Uranus in the 4th house in Cancer, which means, a real home, but in Cancer means it was a very unusual home. Well, yeah, he grew up with actors. His brother was also an actor. It was not a normal, it was Ozzie and Harriet on TV, with cameras. It was a very unusual home life. The opposite point is, of course, the 10th house, which is career. Well, this is a person for whom career has been very important, and you see it there. The midheaven can be in 9th, 10th, or 11th houses. In this case, using whole sign houses, it's in the 10th house. So it's about career, and being responsible. The nodal axis, North Node, South Node, are right on that MC-IC line. With the North Node, he got soul nourishment from seeking career, from being successful, from having that acclaim. It's got the moon there in partile conjunction with the nodal axis. Who else is also there? And this is hidden because it's not seen by the naked eye. Chiron. To a certain extent, all of this exposure he received gave him a certain kind of wounding and a knowledge that made him kind of an older soul than he appears. It's in Capricorn. He had to learn to be responsible very young. He had to learn to stand on his marks. He had to learn his lines at a very early age, and having lots of people, depending upon him doing this and making a lot of money for his family. He was a breadwinner. Now, his father was also acting, and so was his brother, but he was really earning money very early on. And he was personally there as the moon. Now, the moon is not as powerful as it might have been because the sun is above the horizon. The sun was actually rising in the east with Venus and Mercury. But being so highly elevated, being conjunct the nodal axis and the midheaven, very much empowered that moon. It's a very angular moon. Always look for the angular planets in a chart because they tell you where the real power is. And sometimes they can overwrite other planets if the planet's not angular. Who else is angular? The Uranus is angular in the 4th house. So that unusual life had a lot of leverage about him. The exposure to lots of people in the acting world as part of his acting, his family. He thinks of these people on the set with him like he thinks of him as his family, because he grew up in this experience. Who else is angular? Neptune. Neptune in the 7th house at 25 degrees Libra, within 2 degrees of the star Spica, a very prolific position. Partnerships related to a shared vision and imagination is primary to how he makes his relationships. The fact that the asteroid Sirius is there too shows he's a very good shepherd within partnerships. And that's the interesting thing here. He's got a 12th house sun. He's got the moon in the 10th house. He's got Neptune, in the 7th house. His approach to directing is not so much about follow me as it is about let's move the group in the correct direction and let them do what they need to do. That Mars in Sagittarius in the 9th house comes out the same way. Sagittarius is about giving advice. Mars is about having energy in that situation. He's a person with boundless energy. Sagittarius, it's about, having the long view. He really is like a shepherd. He shepherds his partnership towards the correct direction. He talks about this, when he's working, let the actors find their roles. You make suggestions here and there, but let them dig deep and find the personality in there so that they know, what they're looking for. It's a very interesting approach, and it allows him to use that 12th house sun effectively because he can get the overall vision without being necessarily tied to it. See, the thing about the 12th house is you have to be open to the inspiration. It's what's called a succeedant house. The succeedant houses are the 12th house, the 3rd house, and the 6th house, and the 9th house. They're the place in which energy is now related into the human sphere. It would really be the way you would say it, the human sphere, into the place where it's now applied to how people work. The angular houses, they're at the place where things are initiated. In the 1st house, the 4th house, 7th house, 10th house. 1st house is where the personality bursts out. 4th house is where you establish the home. 7th house is where you establish the partnership. 10th house is where you establish the beachhead of your career. And then, the Caden houses are the ones following it, where it gets systemized. And then following the succeedant houses is where it reaches people. It reaches humans. Well, with the sun in the 12th house, It means you are always sensitive to all of the elements going on around you. And yet the 12th house is the house with the least amount of ego. It's the place where you are least personally invested in having my personal expression out there on the screen. It's really about, I want to have the collective's vision with all the contributions out there on the screen, which is a tremendous position for a director because it makes for a wonderful working relationship because people know you're actually listening to them because that's where you get your inspiration. That's where you're getting your magic. And that's where the power comes from. You realize it's out there around you. It's interesting too that he has, the Aries rising. So all the houses are in the correct spot. One of the things about it is it makes a person very identifiable. And in something like acting, it's really helpful when the person can be identified easily because they are an archetype. So it's a very interesting chart. It's so interesting how it plays into his work as a child actor. And I think if you ever have a chance to see anything about how he directs, you'll see how this chart plays out in real life. If you'd like to see more portraits, come visit us on Tuesdays. That's when we put the new portraits up. And come back and see us on Fridays for the weekly forecasts. You'll find both of those at Planetary Calendar Astrology on YouTube. You can also find them along with our calendars and books at planetarycalendar.com. We hope you found this illuminating and enjoy.